I heard my son say 4 words on the phone that he never meant for me to hear. He has to go. I didn't say a word back. I just stood there in my own garage with a wrench in my hand, listening to my only child talk about getting rid of me the way you talk about getting rid of an old car. 2 months later, he and his wife came home from a business trip, smiling and tan, right up until their key wouldn't turn in the lock. Taped to the door was an envelope with his name on it. By the time they finished reading what was inside, they were both screaming on the front lawn. My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 74 years old. For 41 years, I ran a small auto repair shop just outside Columbus, Ohio, fixing transmissions and brakes for anybody who walked through my door. I raised one son in the house on Birchwood Lane, buried my wife from that same house, and always figured I'd die there peacefully too. My son had other plans. This is the story of how I found out about them, and what I did before he ever got the chance. My wife Alina passed away 2 years ago, on a cold February morning, in the bedroom we'd shared for 39 years. After the funeral, the house on Birchwood Lane felt too big and too quiet for one old man. Some mornings I still made coffee for 2 out of habit before I caught myself. My son Derek called me every Sunday like clockwork, and about 6 months after Alina died, he showed up at my door with his wife Melissa, and a suggestion that sounded at the time like the kindest thing anyone had offered me in years. "Dad, you shouldn't be rattling around this big house alone," he said, standing in my kitchen with his hands in his pockets. "Melissa and I were talking. Why don't we move in, help you out, save on rent while we save up for our own place?" I said yes before he even finished the sentence. Within 3 weeks, they'd packed up their apartment and moved into the 2 spare bedrooms upstairs, the ones Alina and I had once hoped to fill with grandchildren. For a few months, it really did feel like a blessing. Melissa cooked most nights. Derek fixed the gutters without me asking. We watched football on Sundays the way we used to when he was a boy, and for the first time since Alina died, the house didn't feel so empty. I told my neighbor Stan across the street that I was the luckiest old man in Ohio, having my own son look after me like that. I had no idea that the man smiling across my dinner table every night was already counting down the days until the house belonged to somebody else, and that somebody wasn't going to be me. By the 6th month, small things started shifting, the kind of things you brush off because you don't want to believe what they might mean. Melissa started calling the house ours instead of your dad's place when she talked to her sister on the phone. She swapped out the curtains Alina had picked, said the old ones let in too much dust. Derek started asking more about my pension, my savings, whether the house was paid off free and clear. It was since 2009. I told myself a son should know these things. One night at dinner, Derek mentioned that his old college friend Greg had just inherited his mother's house and sold it for close to $875,000. "Prices out here are just crazy right now," he said, looking around my kitchen in a way that made the back of my neck go cold, though I couldn't have told you why. Not long after, Melissa started inviting a realtor friend of hers over for coffee, a woman named Paula. I thought she was just being neighborly. I later learned Paula had already given them a full estimate on my house without my knowledge. I want you to remember that trust, because it's exactly what made what came next hit so hard. Around the 8th month, Derek started saying things like, "Dad, you're forgetting things more than you used to," even when I hadn't forgotten a thing. I misplaced my reading glasses once, the way I always had, and by dinner he was telling Melissa across the table, like I wasn't even sitting there, that he was getting worried about my memory. He started driving me to my doctor's appointments, even though I'd been driving myself for 50 years without an accident. And he'd sit in the room asking pointed questions about cognitive decline that I hadn't asked and didn't need answered. Melissa started leaving pamphlets on the kitchen counter. Soft lighting, smiling gray-haired actors on the cover. Places with names like Cedar Grove and Tranquil Oaks. When I asked her about them, she said, sweet as anything, "Oh, those are just for research, Walter, in case we ever need them down the road." Down the road. That's the phrase she used. I didn't argue. I didn't want to be the paranoid old man accusing his own family over a stack of glossy brochures. So I kept smiling and kept quiet, while some part of me, the part that had spent 41 years reading people who lied to my face about their car trouble, started paying very close attention to every word coming out of my son's mouth. But what I overheard next changed everything. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in April. I'd gone out to the garage looking for an old socket wrench when I heard Derek's voice through the kitchen door I'd left cracked open. He was on the phone, talking low and fast, clearly thinking he was alone in the house. "No, listen," he was saying. "The doctor already said his memory is declining. That's on record now. That's what we need. Once we get him into Cedar Grove, the paperwork practically signs itself. We're not kicking him out. We're talking about him needing care. He can't get living alone with us working full time." I stood frozen in that doorway, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he'd hear it through the wall. He kept going. "Paula already ran the numbers. With the market the way it is, we're looking at right around $875,000 for the house, maybe more if we list before fall. That covers his care for years and leaves plenty left over for us." Melissa must have said something back because Derek laughed, actually laughed. "He has to go. That's just the reality of it. It's not personal, it's just what makes sense for everybody. He has to go." 4 words. I stood in that garage for what felt like an hour but was probably 2 minutes, and I didn't make a sound. I set the wrench down as quiet as I'd picked it up, walked back through the yard, and sat down on the porch steps in the April sun like nothing in the world had just changed. Even though everything had, I want to be honest with you. My first instinct was to walk into that kitchen and ask my son exactly what kind of man says he has to go about his own father, like I was an old couch nobody wanted anymore. But I didn't. 41 years of running a business teaches you something. It isn't how to fix a transmission. It's how to keep your face calm when somebody's lying to you, so you can figure out exactly what they're planning before you say a single word. So that night at dinner, I ate Melissa's pot roast and asked Derek how work was going, same as always. I didn't mention the phone call. I didn't mention Cedar Grove or the $875,000, or the fact that my own son had just described getting rid of me like I was a car that failed inspection. I went to bed that night and didn't sleep, not for 1 minute. I lay there going over every polite comment Melissa had made about those brochures, every doctor's appointment Derek had suddenly started attending, every question about my pension and whether the house was paid off. It all lined up now, every piece of it, like a puzzle I'd been too trusting to see the shape of. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, lying in the house I'd owned since 1991, the house where I'd raised the same son who now wanted me gone, I made a decision. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to accuse anybody of anything. I was simply going to find out exactly where I stood legally before they had the chance to make a single move against me. The following Monday, I told Derek I had a doctor's appointment across town and drove myself there in my own truck, a 2012 Ford F-150 I'd had for 12 years. Instead of the doctor's office, I drove to see a lawyer named Diane Foster, whose office sat above a bakery on Main Street, recommended years ago by a customer from my shop. I sat across from her desk and told her everything, the phone call, the brochures, the questions about my finances, all of it laid out plain. Diane pulled up the county records right there on her computer. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "this house is deeded solely in your name. No one else is on that title, And unless you've signed a power of attorney or some other legal document, nobody can sell this house, admit you to a facility, or touch a single dollar of your money without your consent. Then she asked a question that made my stomach drop. Has your son asked you to sign anything recently? Anything he described as insurance forms or medical paperwork? And I remembered instantly. A stack of papers Derek had left on the kitchen table 2 weeks earlier, telling me they were updated insurance documents that needed my signature for the records. I hadn't signed them yet. I don't sign anything without my reading glasses and a clear head. Diane asked me to bring those papers in immediately. 3 days later, she confirmed exactly what we both already suspected. They weren't insurance forms at all. They were a durable power of attorney, giving Derek full legal control over my finances, my health care, and my home. I never signed that power of attorney. And I never will, but finding it changed something in me. I wasn't just an old man being talked about behind his back anymore. I was a man whose own son had tried to trick him into signing away his own life on a Tuesday afternoon, over a stack of papers labeled to look boring and routine. Diane recommended a realtor she trusted completely, a sharp young woman named Rachel Kim, who worked out of an office across town and had a reputation for moving houses fast and quiet when clients needed discretion. I met Rachel at a coffee shop 2 miles from the house, paid cash for both our coffees, and told her I wanted to sell my house without my son or his wife knowing anything about it until it was already done. Rachel didn't ask why. She just nodded like she'd heard this kind of story before and told me a house like mine, 4 bedrooms, updated kitchen, sitting on a third of an acre, could realistically bring in close to $875,000 if we moved quickly. I opened a new bank account at a credit union across town that Derek didn't know existed, had my mail redirected to a P.O. box, and started meeting Rachel every Thursday afternoon, while Derek and Melissa thought I was at physical therapy for my knee. For the first time in months, I felt like I was the one holding the cards, and it felt better than I can properly explain. At this point, I thought the hardest part was already behind me. I was wrong. The hardest part was staying calm enough to pull it off. To keep Derek and Melissa relaxed, I let them take me on a tour of Cedar Grove. I walked through those hallways with the soft lighting and the smell of lemon cleaner, nodded politely at the activities calendar, and even told the tour coordinator the dining room looked lovely, all while knowing I had no intention of ever living there. Derek looked so pleased in the car afterward, telling Melissa on speakerphone that I seemed really open to it, that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Meanwhile, Rachel had listed my house under a private, discreet listing that never showed up on the big websites Derek or Melissa might stumble across, marketed only through word of mouth. Within 9 days, we had 3 offers. The best one came from a young couple named Jason and Mia Thompson, expecting their first baby, who fell in love with the backyard where Derek used to play catch with me 40 years earlier. Their offer came in at $875,000, all cash, flexible closing, no contingencies. Exactly the kind of clean, fast deal Diane had told me to watch for. I sat in Rachel's office and signed that purchase agreement with a hand steadier than I expected, thinking about my son's voice in that garage doorway saying, "He has to go," like it was the easiest decision in the world. Well, Derek, somebody does have to go. Turns out it just isn't going to be me. About 2 weeks after I signed that agreement, Derek came home from work glowing, the way he used to when he was a boy and got picked for the baseball team. His company was sending him and Melissa to a conference in Chicago for 8 days, all expenses paid. "It's actually perfect timing, Dad," he told me over dinner, not realizing exactly how right he was. "While we're gone, you should think more about Cedar Grove." Maybe even put down a deposit before we get back. I told him I'd think about it, same calm voice I'd been using for weeks. Inside, I was doing the math. Rachel and Diane had already told me closing could happen in as little as 12 days once both sides signed off. And the Thompsons, eager and pre-approved, were ready to move the moment I gave the word. If I had known just how fast it would all unravel once they left town, I might have savored those last calm mornings a little more. But I didn't know yet. I just knew it was time. Derek and Melissa left for the airport on a Sunday morning, suitcases by the door, Melissa reminding me 3 times to water her orchids. I stood on the porch and waved as Derek's car pulled out of the driveway, the same driveway he used to ride his bike down as a boy. The second that car disappeared around the corner, I called Rachel Kim and told her one simple thing. Let's move the closing date up. Let's do it this week, while they're gone, before they ever get the chance to come home and stop what's already in motion. The closing happened that Wednesday, 4 days into their trip, in a small conference room at a title company downtown. Jason and Mia Thompson sat across the table from me, Mia's hand resting on her round belly, both of them practically bouncing with excitement about raising their child in that backyard. I signed page after page, feeling lighter with every signature. When it was done, Rachel handed me a check for $875,000, minus fees, more money than I had ever seen in one place in my life. I'd already found my own new home, a bright independent living condo at a community called Hillcrest Commons, 30 minutes away. With a woodworking shop in the basement I could use whenever I wanted. Nobody chose it for me off a glossy brochure. I chose it myself, walked through it myself, paid for it in cash myself, and signed my own name on my own lease. I spent that Wednesday and all of Thursday with 2 movers I'd hired quietly weeks in advance, packing up 40 years of my life. Elinor's china, my father's old workbench, photographs off the walls. Everything that actually mattered. I left the rest behind for the new owners, who were thrilled to take the furniture off my hands for a fair price. By Thursday evening, the house on Birchwood Lane belonged completely to Jason and Mia Thompson. The locks had been changed by a locksmith Rachel arranged, and I was sitting in my new living room in Hillcrest Commons, watching the sun go down with a cup of coffee in my hand, feeling more peace than I had in over a year. Before I left Birchwood Lane for the last time, I sat down at the kitchen table where Elinor and I had eaten breakfast for 39 years, and I wrote one final letter. Not to be cruel, just to be honest. I taped it to the front door, right at eye level where I knew Derek's key would fail to turn. I told him I knew everything. I told him I'd been standing in the garage that Thursday in April, holding a wrench, when I heard him tell Melissa on the phone that I had to go. I told him the house had been sold, fair and legal, to a wonderful young family who deserved it far more than 2 people who'd spent a year planning how to put their own father away. I told him I wasn't angry anymore, not really, just disappointed in a way that went deeper than anger ever could. I told him not to bother trying to reach me at the old numbers, since I'd already closed those accounts, but that I would answer if he ever called simply to say he was sorry and meant it. I signed it the way I'd signed every card to that boy since he was 7 years old. Love, Dad. Then I locked the door for the last time, got in my truck, and drove away without looking back, not even once in the mirror. Derek told me later, weeks after, that he and Melissa pulled into the driveway that Sunday evening, still tan from their trip, Melissa already talking about checking on her orchids. Derek walked up to the front door with his key in hand, same as he'd done 10,000 times before, and it simply would not turn. He assumed it was jammed, jiggled it, tried again. That's when Mia Thompson opened the door from the inside, confused, holding her newborn against her shoulder, asking Derek who exactly he was. according to my neighbor Stan, who watched the whole thing from his porch. Derek stood frozen on the steps for a long moment before he noticed the envelope taped beside the doorframe with his name written across the front. Stan said Melissa read it first, standing right there on the lawn, and her hands started shaking about halfway through. Derek grabbed the letter from her when she couldn't finish it, read the rest himself, and that's when the screaming started. Loud enough that 3 different neighbors came out onto their porches to see what was happening. My phone started ringing 4 minutes later. I didn't answer, not that night. Derek called me 34 times over the next 3 days. I let every single one go to voicemail. Not out of cruelty, but because I wanted him to sit with exactly the feeling he'd been so ready to hand me. On the 4th day, sitting on my new balcony with the trees turning orange in the evening light, I finally picked up. His voice cracked the second I said hello. "Dad, please. We didn't mean it like that. We can fix this. Just tell us where you are." I let him talk for a while. Let him get through the apologies and the excuses about stress and money and how things had just gotten away from them. And when he finally stopped, I told him the truth as plainly as I could. I told him I'd heard every word of that phone call in April, that I knew about the power of attorney disguised as insurance forms, that I knew exactly what Cedar Grove and $875,000 had meant to him and Melissa for months before I ever said a word. I told him I wasn't going to yell, because he was still my son and I still loved him. But that love didn't mean I owed him a house I'd worked 41 years to pay off. Especially not after he decided on his own that I had to go. I told him I was happy, genuinely happy, in a place I'd chosen myself, surrounded by people my own age who respected me instead of planning around me. Before I hung up, I told him the door wasn't closed forever, but it would only open again when he was ready to see me as his father again, and not as $875,000 standing in the way of his plans. I hung up the phone, set it on the table beside my coffee, and looked out at that tree line one more time, feeling, for the first time in longer than I could remember, completely and finally at peace. If you made it to the end of this one, you already know exactly what it feels like when a quiet man finally stops being quiet. So let me ask you, what would you have done in my position? Would you have confronted them the second you heard that phone call, or would you have played it just as quiet as I did? Let me know in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from tonight. If this story kept you hooked, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and I'll see you in the next one.